Welcome to Riverdale After Dark, a podcast about the CW's Riverdale that's got its memory back and feeling awful sad about it. I'm Alex.
When you walk through the darkness for as long as we have, sometimes you just have to, hold on a second, I'm just listening to the podcast that we do just to learn about what's happened before. And honestly, it's changing my whole perspective on things. I'm Justin.
Wait, so there's just one more episode left?
Just one more left, Pete. We are going to be talking about Riverdale Season 7, Episode 19, Chapter 136, The Golden Age of Television, a.k.a. the second to last episode of Riverdale ever. Oh, my God. Okay, so just brief bit of recap on the first episode of Riverdale, and then we'll work forward from there.
Just watch the show. We are Archie. We are all of the characters right now. We are just needing to rewatch this whole show for the recap.
I am going to very quickly go through the base level of stuff you need to know to understand this episode. The characters have been back in the 1950s, as we found out at the beginning of the season, due to a comet explosion that's too complicated to get into here. Tabitha, who is an angel, tried to untangle the timelines, put everybody safely back in 1955, and implored Jughead to bend towards justice, basically try to leave the world better than than it was in the main Riverdale timeline. That is the thing that we're looping back to here. Betty has been working on publishing a book all about giving advice to teenagers and about the voice of teenagers. She also settled a lot of stuff with her mother, Alice, in the last episode when it came out that Hal had an affair with Ethel Mugg's mother. Ethel is, in fact, his daughter. Jughead is dating Veronica. That's one of the big relationships going on here. Cheryl is, of course, dating Tony. Veronica is also working at the movie theater, and it has some connections with Hollywood. Archie is living with Reggie, or rather, Reggie is living with Archie, and Reggie has a basketball camp scholarship, something like that, meanwhile...
It's important.
Yes, it is important. And Archie, meanwhile, is really interested in being a beat poet. That is the thing that he's been exploring along with Mrs. Grundy, who has been stepping in as his teacher. Also on the Jughead beat, we should mention that the Comics Code Authority is a very real thing in this timeline, and they've been trying to shut down Pep Comics, which is where Jughead has been working with an editor named Mr. Fieldstone. So that's kind of important. That's run by Mr. Featherhead, Principal Featherhead, Dr. Werthers and Sister Woodhouse. Also on the Blossom front, we probably should have mentioned that it turned out that Clifford Blossom and Penelope Blossom were both Russian spies who were creating a P-bomb, a palladium bomb, and they were arrested in the last episode thanks to some snooping by Cheryl and Jughead. Kevin and Clay are dating, and Uncle Frank, who was kicked out of the Andrews household and went to live with Tom Keller. We find out more about that in this episode. Additionally, one last thing that I'll mention here real quick.
Do we need that? I
needed that.
Yes.
Yeah. And the last thing that I'll mention is there's Evelyn Evernever is the foil for Cheryl in this timeline. She took over the River Vixens, and we deal with that as well. Here's what I'm going to throw out there first, because just the biggest possible broad overview of this plot. The first half of this episode is a lot of wrapping up the 1950s stuff. And then Angel Tabitha comes back, reveals everything. Everybody gets their memories back by, as we talked about the last episode, literally binge watching the TV show Riverdale.
Binge watching.
I think we willed this into existence. I'm not saying, I feel like we
give
said
you the credit for this, 100%.
I said this as a joke 4 seasons ago, and then it happened in the show. And I'm not saying it definitely is the cause of it, but I think that it occurred on this podcast.
Yes, I think so too. But at the end, ultimately, where we end up is that both Jughead and Betty surprisingly decide to keep all their memories, while everybody else just gets the happy memories of their time over the course of Riverdale. Angel Tabitha leaves, presumably forever, while the quote-unquote real Tabitha in the 1950s, we find out she's going to move to Chicago. She's going to become a civil rights leader and really important for the world. I'm curious to hear how you guys felt about this, because I know there's a lot of trepidation and anticipation and wondering about what was going to happen. This didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, but I legitimately, like, my eyes were wet for most of the second half of this episode. Like, I was like, I got very emotional, like, watching everybody get their memories back going through this. Again, like, it was not
you watching them watch the show that we watch.
Yes.
Got you emotional?
Seeing this goodbye to Riverdale and really seeing how that affected them, like, it legitimately affected me. How did you guys feel about it?
I mean, I think this was like the leveling up of this episode is unbelievable. Just from the way everything looked, the directing, the lighting, down to the wardrobe, everything felt bigger. This felt like a feature film version of the show. And I thought it was the perfect time to just deploy all of this, the extra money they spent on it. They must have taken way more time, the way these scenes look, the choreography, everything. And then to your point, Alex, the emotionality of the back half of this episode, one of the biggest things I thought of was, this show when it first came out had the vibe of Twin Peaks. It was like Twin Peaks meets Archie Comics on the CW. And I feel like this episode paid that off so hard. This was such a great version of that show. And it was emotional, but it was also meta in a way that no other show could ever do. They gave us all the things that we've been wanting. They touched on the ships in a way that I feel like set the stage for a crazy final episode.
Pete, what about you? You've been very trepidatious about this season in general, so I'm curious to hear what you thought.
Yeah, this was this was the here we go episode where it was like, okay, they're somehow going to try to explain this all, and it was a lot. I did get emotional in this episode, but it was at a weird moment where Jughead hit the spinner rack, and I got real emotional about comics on the spinner rack. It was like, oh my God, the spinner rack. I miss you, spinner rack. That was a sweet part of my childhood.
Very similarly, when he's in Pop's Diner and he's eating breakfast, I was like, oh my God, I forgot to have breakfast this morning. And that really got me as well.
That
so
got you?
Right there with you.
Oh,
right
nice.
That's totally true. No, I felt the same way when Archie was like, the bear. And I was like,
oh, yeah.
Yep.
Everybody just looked at the camera and was like, you guys remember that, right?
Well, so there were so many moments in the first half of the episode that really got me. I know we're jumping all over, and then we can kind of dive into the storylines in particular. But like, yeah, go ahead, Pete.
This is insane, though, right? Because you're basically saying to somebody, no, they made a TV show out of you. Don't have to. There's this whole show about your life that we're going to sit down and you're going to watch. I would just have so many questions. But the fact that, like Justin said, they pull it off in a way that it's insane, but they did it, and it was like not the craziest thing to have happen. You know what I mean? Like Nana Rose giving us the big speech of the Blossom Phoenix Rising was just so riveting. It had everything.
Maybe the best way to talk about this. Maybe the best way to talk about it is to cover the first half up until Tabitha shows up in Jughead's train car that he lives in, something that we've accepted as normal now. Yeah, when Angel Tabitha shows up in a child's train car that he lives in.
House? Yeah, the train car house.
That normal thing is where we should pivot. But let's talk about sort of the wrapping up. Because I also think, the back end is where all the heat is for this episode. But they did an amazing job of wrapping up the themes that they established at the top of the season that have sort of been woven throughout everything so far, I thought.
Yeah, I can walk us through. We haven't done this in a while, but but I could walk us through beat by beat in terms of the plot. Yes, Pete.
I just want to say before we do that, the part where Archie grapples with all the different versions of himself was just like meta and a way that was so like classic Archie and hilarious.
You know what, Pete? Just while we're feeling nostalgic about the show, let's feel nostalgic about the thing where we're like, okay, let's go back to the beginning. You're like, just one thing before we do that. And then you say something that we will definitely cover later, and you just have to say it early.
I have to say it.
Yeah, I know. You have to say it.
Good times. Good times. I love this. Let's go back and talk about the beginning of the episode. So we start off with Jughead is talking about Riverdale reshuffling is the word that he uses after the reveal of the P-bomb. The last episode, one of the big fallouts is that Featherhead steps down, and the initial implication is that Werther's maybe accused him of being a communist, probably did in fact, but as we very soon find out a little later in the episode, Werther's is actually leaving to go to Washington in order to continue his fight against comics. This is tying, again, into the very real Comics Code Authority thing that happened with Dr. Wortham, not Dr. Werther's originals.
Frederick Wortham is a real person. With his book was The Corruption of the Innocent or something very dramatic. Where I did a report on this in 11th grade. So shouts to Mr. Shart's English
Finally
class.
pay it off.
Wait, did you say Mr. Shart's?
Yep, his name was Mr. Sharp.
Oh, did that ever come up in any capacity?
I don't know. What do you mean? We called him Mr. Shart every day.
Oh, nice.
And he, had IBS. So I don't know why. What would that have to do with it? How are those two things connected?
That's just pretty spot on, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I grew up in a little town called Riverdale, but I loved all of this.
I told you guys about my 11th grade teacher, Mr. Poopsie Oopsie.
It is, yes. You talk about him a lot. He had a real impact on you.
He really did. He was like, someday you should do a podcast, and I was like, okay, sounds good.
Wow.
Don't shout, idiot.
I like all this wrap up, especially like we didn't get the youth rebellion that I thought was coming, but we got the same results.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We didn't get the full confrontation, but Featherhead steps down. Hal moves to the basement. Everything sort of the blossoms were taken off the map. Alice and Betty reconnected. We got the result that I felt like was coming. It's just I continue to be surprised we didn't get a full on confrontation with a lot of these people.
I'm sorry, we just can't just say Hal moves to the basement, because that was such a weird thing to be like, don't worry, Betty, I'm going to move to the basement. And I was just like, I guess that's a thing that happens in the 50s.
That's a step up. I'm in the basement right now. I'd love to live in the basement. We got the TV down here. We got the games down here. I'm having a good time. I podcast.
Maybe Hal's excited, or maybe you're a serial killer. One of those two things.
One of the two things.
Either way, I guess we'll see what happens. I did want to throw something out to you guys that was striking me during this episode. Is Alice and Betty, I'm not going to say the best relationship of the show, but the most fleshed out relationship in the history of the show?
I think it's the relationship that has been given the most time, nuance, and ability to progress. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we got to the moment, and just to talk about it, like Betty and Alice are the most connected they've ever been, I think, in this episode, where the way that Betty talks to her about like wanting to follow her dreams, Alice steps up and does right by the school system after she talks with Tony, which was great. Yeah, it's not too late for you. The way Alice reads Betty's book, immediately setting their relationship back into like, well, we're enemies again. And then we get this great final payoff of Alice waking Betty up in the most normal way possible, sitting at the end of her bed while she's sleeping.
When you wake up in the morning and your parent is just sitting over you, staring at you while you sleep.
It's crazy. I've sat at the end of your bed, Pete, so long, but you just haven't woken up. I feel weird because I finally finished your book, the Pete Mystique.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Did you like my picture on the cover?
Yes, I did.
I took the photo and then painted it up, Pete.
Oh, wow.
I know Alex is a beautiful painter. But yeah, you're right. I think they are. It's sort of at least this season for sure, it is the relationship that the show is sort of putting on top, on Front Street.
And those scenes were really beautiful. I mean, I think this is something, they obviously discovered this really early on. They knew Machen Abick, obviously fantastic actress. Lily Reinhardt coming in relatively fresh to the show, but I think they very quickly realized what they had with her as well. But it's been very clear over 7 seasons, they've given such meaty, dramatic stuff to the two of them to do together. I loved having that in this last episode. And presumably we'll get like a little bit more in the next episode as well. But in terms of a wrap up to the relationship, a place to potentially leave them, I thought it was so lovely to see and just to spend the time with those scenes, but also get back to the place where like the power dynamic really shifted back to the way that we know it, you know, that Betty's the adult in the relationship. She's always been the adult for 7 seasons. Something that we talked a lot about at the beginning of the season with the memories being missing is they're still the same characters. They're just growing into maybe a new place or maybe a different place. And I thought what we really, really saw this episode in particular with Betty and Alice is they got back to the Betty-Alice relationship the way we know it. They're just timeline-wise in different places, and they also know different things. I'm going to throw something else out at you guys that there's been a lot of discussion about. This got thrown out on our Patreon Slack. I've seen people discussing this online as well, is Betty's hair, because as of the previous episode, she had the ponytail again,
yes, she did.
but also sometimes she has the hair loose and like kind of a bob sort of thing going on. People are very confused about that. Here's my theory that I want to throw out at you guys. One, my theory, this is a big theory. Hair grows. Like, I think it grows longer over time. So
I've read about this theory, and I want to consult my barber about this.
Okay.
Because I constantly go there and say, like, can you make my hair longer, sir?
Mm-hmm. But so I think part of it is like her hair literally did go longer, so they were able to put it in a ponytail, though maybe the extensions is making it look longer than it actually is. But I also think thematically the thing that's going on here in this episode, even before the memories come back, is we have this ideal mix, at least in terms of the way the show tells us it, of the Betty we have known from 6 seasons, who is an investigator, who is in charge, who is confident, knows who she is and knows what she wants and goes for it, but also this pure, more innocent 1950s Betty that she's not leaving behind at the same time. So we get to see the 1950s hair on her, but we also get to see the classic ponytail at the same time because she's really splitting the difference between these two things.
I would take it one step further and to say, like, I think the journey Betty's gone through this season is like really growing up, like, and all the characters as an extension. But like to have her like be this more composed, like it feels like she's in charge of everything now. And I think it's interesting that the time jump where we sort of missed them really maturing and they built a lot of problems into their lives. This season has been, look, this is how they actually grow up and become the best versions of themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing with all of them, except Archie seems to be growing more innocent and sort of schoolboy.
He's going to be a hobo.
Yeah. Yeah, he's gonna jump on a train somewhere. Well, let's keep walking through this. So we talked about the scene with Alice saying that she's never been alone. So sad the way that Mae Janamick delivers that. And then we cut over to the Blossoms, and finally Nana Blossom is back. She is in charge. Ooh. Just her, Julian,
rising like
and
the
Cheryl.
Phoenix.
Such a perfect Nana Blossom speech of like, well, we finally got rid of those two. That's for the better. But the Blossoms must rise again. I loved it. Great.
Yeah, absolute maniac.
Well, and Cheryl's plan, too, where she's like, I know exactly what I'm going to do to help the Blossoms rise again. Take over the cheerleading squad.
Yeah.
That's what you start with the cheerleading squad, always. Every plan starts with that.
And I loved this for 2 reasons. I thought Cheryl's challenge was great. Cheryl got a great wild Cheryl, like the Cheryl that's a total wild card. She got to be that here and come in, have this amazing dance off, shot beautifully, like the sunlight in this episode, the way it's pouring in, sunsets, always, it's beautiful. And then I know Evelyn is now sort of the villain of this season in a way. I love the way she acts. She like burns Cheryl right when she walks in and then just screams and runs out the door. Yeah. Evelyn Never has been one of my favorite characters to watch, even though she's like a villain. I'm not saying I like her takes, but I think she's such a good foil in this season.
Have you read her? She does a column weekly in the Federalist, and it's very
exactly. When everyone's another thing we have to mention is the return of Weatherby and his big speech, and like I thought they really gave this time in in a precious bit of real estate where we're down to the last 2 episodes of Riverdale, they let Weatherby talk about these bigger themes that came up, in the first episode we talked about, and then later about race in relation to being young in this era, and how everyone in Riverdale, in the core 4 and beyond, really took this up, and to have Weatherby have this great big speech and say that Riverdale is a better place, I think was really great. Really nice way.
Yeah, his speech, being decent was really fantastic. But I got to back up the truck here. That Cheryl, we got a real Cheryl entrance in this, when she kind of kicks open the door for her, Vixen comeback. And then the, blowing the kiss as she's doing the split finishing move. I mean, that was just unbelievable. That was just...
And that's your finishing move in Street Fighter, right, Pete?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, Mortal Kombat, that's my finishing move. There's no question.
I agree with you guys. I loved getting one more Cheryl dance battle out of almost nowhere. That was great. Very classic. We've got multiple
Rockin'
times.
Robin.
Yeah, Rockin' Robin got that multiple times over the course of the show. I also love the move of her telling the cheerleading squad and saying, "I'm with Tony Topaz. We're getting steady. We want to live in the light." And then two other random characters are like, "We're also gay."
Yeah. Well, but I see, half of me was like, oh, that's a little, these people are new. But I also like it to be which I think is the point here, is the choices that these people are making, and Tabitha gets into this later, are changing not just Riverdale, but the world. Mm-hmm. And so, I think this was a necessary example to show that, look, when one person steps up and puts themselves out there, it helps other people, and it's an exponential effect. And so I appreciated it, even though it was wild that they were introduced seconds before they had a huge emotional moment in front of the camera.
Yeah. Well, to your point, I mean, this is a bigger theme and idea here, but something that I'd posit about what they're doing here is they started this season for Riverdale in a semi-realistic place, in terms of talking about race, in terms of talking about homophobia, in terms of talking about all these issues. What they're saying now is the actions that they've taken, thanks to their foreknowledge running below the surface or manipulations from Angel Tabitha or whatever, are pushing it a little bit towards fantasy land. This is not the real world. This is Archie Comics / Riverdale world. But I think the lesson the show is imparting to us is these little actions can have bigger ramifications. Yeah. That in the real world, if you come out to your cheerleading squad in the 1950s, are 2 more people going to come out and it'd be totally fine for everybody? Absolutely not. But if we in 2023 do little acts of kindness, try to push things forward, try to be better and more honest people and more understanding of the people around us in little ways and big ways, we will push the way forward.
Well, and I think, yes, but even beyond that, I think it's there are just as many acts of repression happening in our world as there were then, on a personal basis, to people who are watching this show right now, listening to this podcast. So I think the message rings true across time.
Yeah. To jump back to Weatherby for a second, so good to see him again. I thought that was a great surprise. I don't know who I expected to come in, but it was not Weatherby. It was really good seeing him again. It was a great speech. I also loved Archie going in and being like, hey, there's this teacher.
Allowing Weatherby to set up the other most important relationship of this season, Archie and Mrs Thornton, coming back together.
Why?
Archie and Mrs Thornton have gotten more play than Barchie, dog. What are we talking about here?
Why? Nothing against the actress, nothing against the scene. Why was she back? He had already decided to be on the rails.
How's he going to be a hobo if he doesn't have the encouragement of his poetry teacher?
So we had a great scene, I thought, between Archie and Reggie where they're shooting hoops, and he's he does that great Allen Ginsberg poem. KJ Abbott delivered it really well, and then...
Well, it's just funny. Archie's turned up to 12 in that scene. He's like, I like basketball. I'm a po. I was like, this guy could beat a bear. This guy could beat a bear.
Yeah. He already decided to ride the rails, and then Miss Thornton was like, sounds good. And he's like, sounds good. So I'm just not sure what the function of that scene was necessarily, but it's all right.
I think it's in opposition to Frank from a couple episodes back, really being like, this is inappropriate. I think it was a permission system for Archie to be like, okay, I can pursue this lifestyle, which then sets up the moment with Reggie later where he's like, you know what? I will actually be able to do the same thing and help out my friend by taking your job on the farm. And I love that scene as well. I thought that was really nice. It cemented Archie as the George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, and the Archie from the comics when we saw the issues where he married Betty and Veronica back to back. The issues he married Betty were him being like staying in town and being the figure that just like was the core of Riverdale, and that feels like maybe where we're headed here.
I just want to get back to the kind of like getting that teacher in there. It kind of does this thing of like, I felt like it was righting wrongs of which teacher should be, doing what. And so they were just kind of like, use it like, okay, if,
do you think
Weatherby's back, we should bring back the poetry teacher.
Do you think it would have helped me a little bit, just to throw it out there, if towards the end Angel Tabitha was like, I know you all solved homophobia and racism, but it was really bringing Mrs. Thornton back to school that really pushed you over the edge?
Well, maybe that's what the next episode's all about.
Probably. Mrs. Thornton.
Yeah, Thorntondale. But let me just throw out this also. With Weatherby and Grundy being relatively young in the 50s, makes them age appropriate for when they are in the present day. They get older.
Out here?
I'm just saying, we always talked about early on, like, why is Grundy
like
young?
old like they are in the comic books.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. All right. I thought you were mentioning age appropriate another way. That's a difficult term to throw out there with Grundy, I'm just going to say. So.
Well, I just meant age appropriate in the relation to the comic books, Alex. Keep your mind. Your mind.
All right. Well, let's get back to the plot because some big stuff goes down. We jump over to the Pep's Comics office, which I just want to mention. I felt very stupid watching this episode. I'm sure everybody else realized this. I did not realize until this episode that was the FBI office, was the Pep Comics office.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. There was something about the angles they shot it at. They finally turned it around when I saw Jughead coming down the stairs. I was like, oh, okay. All right, I get it now.
A lot of FBI offices are just former comic book
shops, yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But they are going to publish a story called The Comet Bait on the W.E.B. Du Bois story, which we got mentioned. I don't remember how many episodes back, but Tabitha and Jughead read it together. Obviously, it parallels the actual events with the comet that happened in the previous season, which is the whole reason we're here. But I really like the storyline as well. I loved them publishing the story anyway. Pep Comics shutting down, which I was very surprised about, given that I predicted that Jughead is going to invent Archie Comics. I still kind of think he will.
Hey, I'm going to say that, like, I feel like it's more likely to happen. Yeah. The way that he walks out with the Fieldstone and Jughead photo, like, it feels like it's like the baton is being passed as opposed to something ending. I think Jughead will go on to make Archie Comics.
But I love this move. I thought this was very sweet and nice, and a nice way of bringing the theme back, weaving in the Comet and the Tabitha stuff before she shows up in the second half of the episode. Good stuff.
The only other thing I would say is, like, unless we think Jughead is going to become the writer, director, executive producer of a television show called Riverdale.
Which is possible.
I would even throw that out as probable. That's potentially probable. Well, or paradox.
Or the reason that the comic book shop is closing is so we can open up the FBI office where Bughead will then get back together in the last episode.
Oh, no.
That's a fun fantasy to have. Honestly, Pete, and like I will talk about this in a minute, I thought this was a beautiful Bughead. You had a great Bughead couple moments in this episode.
I agree.
And I think the show, like we've talked about, has moved away from that and keep holding out hope. And there's still hope, technically, for the last episode. But I really loved the moments that they talked about. I guess, are we pivoting to the second half?
Well, no, there's still a couple of other things we need to talk about before we get on here. Kevin goes to visit his dad, and Frank is coming out of the shower. The implication being very clear that Tom and Frank are together. What do we think about this?
I think that is definitely what's happening here. And I think, to me, I thought that we were going to see another scene about it, because it was very strange to me that they showed that and then they left it. But I think maybe the takeaway from it is like, look, these people are miserable and they are together, but they are sort of trapped together and living this lie that he can't tell his son, even though he knows his son is gay like he is. Like, it's like, what like why it just shows the wall between them and the wall between a lot of the parents who are stuck in their conservative ways.
It was just Uncle Frank is dead to me. So then doing this thing after he just like railed on Archie for trying to do something different and be creative. The fact that he is like,
it's pointing out the hypocrisy, and I think,
exactly, and how damaging repression like that can be. And I think it was the one sort of counterpoint to all the like the steps forward that that this show has made and all the characters have made. It was like, look, these people are stuck in their own past. I just,
are we going on? I don't know. I hear what you guys are saying, but I was just like,
maybe we'll see something that will come from this in the final episode. I feel
maybe
like
when they're hanging out in their hotel room, they'll binge watch Riverdale and get their memories back and be nice guys again. We'll see.
Or maybe Keller will write a poem and Frank will be like, "What? The one thing you can't
you can't."
We get a quick scene that's clearly set up for where these characters are going, where Veronica, convinced by Jughead, decides to make a movie of the comet. She hires Clay as the writer and director of the movie. That's a normal thing that happened in the 1950s, right? A bunch of teenagers get together to make a Hollywood movie with Sidney Poitier.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, well,
no
when Clay's been fiddling with a script for years, of course, it's easy to come through. Mm-hmm. I like this. I think this is fun setup. I'm sure we'll get to see more about this in the final episode. But the idea, I feel like Veronica's character in this season, and I guess last season too, she's just basically, we just get headlines from her for the most part, where it's just like, I'm doing this. And I wish we just got more of her life. We get a little bit in the back half of the episode. I'm sure we're going to talk about it. But like, I just want more of like a real journey for her. And I guess you can't hold emotional space for everyone. It's just a bummer that Veronica's the one that's getting a little bit of short shrift.
Well, we don't know. We got a whole episode left.
We'll see. Yeah. I mean, I would also say, conversely, she is a character who always knows what she wants and goes for it. So versus everybody else that's kind of had to figure everything out, she certainly had hiccups along the way, but she knows she likes Hollywood, and then she gets the chance to be a big producer in Hollywood, and she does that. So there you go. But then we get, after Jughead writes his goodbye note to Pep Comics and everybody is reading it, we get him walking back to his train car. And this is the moment, like, in my head, I started going like, oh, here it comes. Here we go.
My literal only thought was, this is wild. Truly, I was like, anything can happen right now. And like, for a show to put you in that headspace, I was so excited about this moment.
Same here. And the way that it was paced out, like, legitimately everything in the second half of the episode, the way the information was paced out, the way they moved through the scenes, the way that they hung on certain moments, it got me. Like, I know we've been waiting for this all season. I know some people would prefer that we would have spent more time with their memories back. Yes. I get that, and I hear that. But dramatically, the last 20 to 25 minutes of this episode was so satisfying and emotionally powerful to me.
Beautifully done.
I'm good with it.
Yeah. We could have had more, though. We could have more.
We could have had more, but we didn't have more. And this is the main thing, like, that I've been saying all along across the season is, I want the show to make me feel something. Like, that's what it does. And it made me feel so many things so strongly just in this 20 to 25 minutes.
But I think what you just said was really interesting. Like, we could have had more, but we didn't have more. That's where we're left with Jughead and Tabitha at the end of this episode. That's the exact thing. It's like, we couldn't have more, but we didn't have more because of the circumstances of our life. And that's just a great universal truth. And I think it's like a beautiful moment. Like, we get, they so much of their relationship was built around like big one kiss moments. And then we get this final kiss goodbye here with them. And it was heartbreaking. I know we're jumped to the end, but like, I just think that that's such a thematic here that you hit on, Alex.
Yeah. Well, let's work through some of this stuff because it is very linear from this point on, but everybody makes very different decisions and we get some sort of big things in terms of setting up the final episode. So Jughead watches Riverdale on TV with Angel Tabitha. She also reminds everybody of exactly what was going on. She managed to untangle the timelines, but put all of the timelines into this one timeline. So she can't get them back to 20 to 23. They're trapped there. They can remember stuff if they want to, And that's ultimately the choice that everybody makes. Jughead tells everybody what's going on. Archie draws the short straw, which I thought was very fun.
Here, before you get any further, so when Tabitha was stabilizing the timelines, what was she doing? Was she just standing there and just like moving her hands around? Like how's...
Well, you know when like you find a cord and it's been all knotted up and you're like, how did this happen? I didn't do anything to this cord.
That's very frustrating. I feel for her too.
That's what she was doing. That's what she was doing.
Stabilizing it with like duct tape.
Yes. I loved Archie getting the short straw, going to the bunker. Archie watches the whole thing. And then we get the first of many like insanely emotional conversations between Jughead and some of the other characters. Archie talking about Fred in this scene. Completely got me.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, and the way they were able to balance those huge emotional moments with some of the like funny things, like Archie listing his things, like Pete, you were saying earlier, the bear line that is coming up in a little bit. Like it was just a great microcosm of the show. Also, the way they parceled them out. So it was like one by one or two in some cases, I thought was really cool. My first thought, though, when everyone's sitting there is poor Julian. He's like, I'm a
Julian
doll?
found out he was a doll. He didn't want to, you're like, oh, my God.
That was so funny, though, just throwing that piece of information there. I love them mentioning.
You're a doll in the future.
You're a doll. And
I'm
he's
sorry?
like, no, I'm not watching that. And also Kevin and Clay decide, we jumped ahead a little bit, but Kevin and Clay decide not to watch it. Because Clay wasn't there. So we get that sweet shot right in the middle of there of them just holding each other on the bed.
Yeah. Love that. I like, you might look a little different. Shot cut to Dilton, who's like, huh? Well, I'm a different actor. I thought that was funny.
But before that, we get Betty and Veronica are the next people to watch. And man, this smash cut there from them watching to them sitting silently in the diner. Veronica saying, you could have prepared us for that better, Jughead Jones.
Yeah.
And just everything with Betty, her talking about her family. Pete, I gotta go to you as the bughead. You get this exchange there of her saying, you and I, we were together. And then he says, until we weren't. And they say, yeah. How'd you feel, honestly?
I was a little disappointed because the way Bughead said it was such a inflection of just like he was like, until we weren't, like it was like a up where I wanted it to have a little bit more weight to him, but this is me putting stuff on something. But the way he was just kind of like lightly or trying to kind of, brush past it was I wanted a little bit more, and I got one more episode to go, so we'll see what happens. But it was just a little like, until we weren't. And then next thing,
I didn't read it
as flip. No, I didn't think it was flip. I thought it was sort of just like knowing. It was like
it was poignant.
It was nice. Yeah. Imagine watching a relationship you had no idea about, and you'd be like, "Oh, we did."
Imagine watching Riverdale for the first time. I mean,
and I do think from a metatextual perspective, they were also recognizing it for the fans that we're not going to ignore the fact that this was a huge chunk of the show for a very long time. We're going to have to talk about it, and then we're also putting a point on it by being clear that like the next half of this episode is not about Betty and Jughead getting back together.
Yeah,
it's about this relationship was over. And I'm sure people will watch it and be frustrated that they weren't like, and also you never called me back after this. And what was that voicemail? And all going through all the plot lines. But this was a sweet, simple way of putting a pin on it when there's a lot of other things to get through emotionally.
Well, and another way to look at what happens later where they're like, we can just remember the good things, not the bad things, is like, we don't have to deal. Well, we'll talk about it in a second, but you don't have to deal with all the minutia of that. It's about the core emotions and the core connections between these people. And I think that's really, really beautiful. Also, I just want to say, like, the actors, Cole Sprouse and Lily Reinhart, dated in real life also, right? And then broke up over the course of the show. So that must have been wild to say to each other on camera for the television show Riverdale. But and one other thing I want to say, hearing them talk about this is how we sound talking to anyone. So that was weird too. I saw myself in here.
So they do, like we're saying, end up deciding to just keep the good memories, or at least most of them do. We'll get to like the cliffhanger at the end there. But I love this as well. It's crazy to watch these characters watching a television of themselves in Riverdale on stage, but I've never seen anything like that on television. Like and to have essentially like a clip show of the best moments of the show in the second to last episode, that me as a viewer reminds me like, oh my God, I loved all of these good times we've watched over the past 7 seasons. Again, really emotionally affecting in a surprising way.
100%. I loved the fact, clip show used to be something that was like sort of derogatory, like, this week's episode of blank sitcom or show is just a clip show. But I love this, the way that they the way the characters are experiencing it is how we experience the show, to bring the viewer and fan and characters together. Like, it felt like we were there as fans of the show at the same time. And that's just a magical thing. Like, it's amazing that the show like could do that, where we got to see, and it boiled down to the ships. You touched on everybody in the current timeline. You have Jughead's arm around Veronica, but then you also see, man, Monica is strong in here. You got the Bughead prom. You get the Archie kiss. You get Tabitha. You get Kevin and Fangs sharing a look where you're like, right, whoa. And it's just like, it was just amazing to see it all at once. It was really great.
Yeah. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I feel like it was just such a huge swing and such a huge thing to do that my mind was kind of just swimming with the fact of like, wait, there's so many more memories other than just good or bad. You know what I mean? There's important memories that maybe inform who I am. Like, just like trying to separate like what you learn and what you don't really fast, and a kind of like all or nothing decision was really hard to just be like, well, you can either have the good memories or you can have the bad memories, or, Dark Betty's like, I'll have the ball, so it was just a lot to kind of like, it was a kind of like a big idea to kind of like to swallow, I think, a little bit, where it was just like, I was like, what? Wait, what?
It was definitely overwhelming, but I think you point to the fact that Jughead and Betty at the end chose to keep the bad memories too, because I think they're the characters that are the most mature. They're the most, especially through this season, they're the most like complete humans currently on the show. And the fact that they were like, well, no, I want to learn all the lessons. I don't want to cut out these things that happened just for the sake of not being able to deal with it. I want to be able to feel. I want to be able to feel everything.
Be together then, if they're the most. You know what I mean?
Well, they're
like
also. I will say, I understand what you're saying, not to run over you, Pete, but I think they're also in this continuity. They're writers. Like, Jughead's always been a writer, but Betty is a writer here. And I think she. Yeah, a published writer, and I think they both understand that they need to understand all of these experiences. Like Jughead says, you need to understand both the dark and the light to get your experiences and be a really whole person. Everybody else, like you're saying, Justin, like Archie is the perfect example of that. He, even with all of his good memories back, still has a lot of growing to do. He had a lot of growing to do in the main continuity as well. So
yeah,
he's going to continue to grow and change. Jughead and Betty are kind of already there. So that's, I think, why they make the decision. I don't want to skip over, though, the Tabitha ending.
Of course, yes.
Oh, my God. That...
Love this.
So good. Absolutely crushed me, but in a good way. Positively crushed me. But having Jughead realize, oh, wait, I'm with Veronica right now, but I was with Tabitha. She's leaving. Tabitha crying and going after her. The line, it really sucks you had to die to make this all happen. Even though she denies it, she kind of did, right?
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, she goes away. Like, that's it. Like,
but there's another Tabitha in this timeline, so she could be in the next episode.
But that's not the one that Jughead loves. Like, they had a connection maybe, but like this is the relationship.
Yeah, no, we're told that Tabitha is going to move to Chicago. She's going to become a civil rights lawyer. She's really important for the world. I don't think, maybe they cross paths, maybe we'll see see her on TV or something like that. But
I would also say, I think importantly, the Jughead Veronica relationship is currently active.
Yes.
Like that was not ended as we predicted here. They had the Tabitha moment. Mm-hmm. But I think, and I think they do love each other, but I think Jughead walks back in and anything can happen.
Yeah. Anything can happen. I will say, though, based on this episode, regardless of what happens in the next episode, and I know this is a crazy thing to say because it's almost a contradiction of terms, but Tabitha is endgame. Like, that is what we are told here. Even if we get to a world where Jughead and Veronica are married in the next episode, and that's how we end the episode, that's fine. Like, technically, yes, that is endgame because that's where we end the game. But here, it's clear that Jughead and Angel Tabitha, that version of Tabitha, they are endgame lovers forever. The way that Tabitha describes it, that bubble where they live their entire lives still exists out there. It's still part of their memories. It's what they still remember. And I think just on that, it was a beautiful, beautiful ending for the couple. I thought it was really well done.
I agree.
And then we go ahead.
Sorry,
John.
do you think that when they were watching Riverdale, did it end with Bailey's comment, or did they watch like some of the season?
Yeah, did they watch some of the new season, or did they stop?
I think what they probably did was they watched the first 2 seasons, and they were like, we really like this. We picked it up the second season after the Netflix pump. And then the third season, they were like, this is too complicated. The mystery is too complicated. I'm gonna peace out, and I'll catch it later on Netflix.
Do you think they fast forwarded through commercials, or was it like commercial free?
Well, it would be fun because Veronica was like, you know what, this show lost me with the floating babies a little bit, but maybe next season will be
Veronica's the Pete of Riverdale.
We do need to talk about the last moment though, because this is another one that like made me gasp from the way that it was paced and the way that it was put out there, because Jughead is in Pops, he's writing and he's talking about he needs to write the final chapter of Riverdale. What else could be called but, and then the music comes in, the Tell Me from the very first episode, and then he types goodbye Riverdale, and then he just sort of goes and sighs like he's not ready for it. Perfect.
He is all of us
in the episode. Yeah,
we were. We were all riding along with all these characters in this episode. I thought,
except for Pete. Except for Pete.
I was hoping that breath was like he was just taking a breath in between eating.
He's in a plane that crashed 2 years.
You know what I mean? Like he was just taking a break between eating one cheeseburger and another, and it's that breath of like, you know.
Oh, here we go. More cheeseburgers.
You take one breath between hamburgers? Yeah, you need to breathe more. You need to breathe more. Less meat, more oxygen, my guy.
Well, listen, I love this episode. I was very into it. There's a lot going into the finale. We'll get to some business in a second. Why don't we talk about MVP for this episode, though? Justin, who's your MVP?
Oh, great. Well, I just have 2 things to say real quick. Gotta get shout out the good, the bad, and the bear. Love that line.
God, the good, the bad, and the bear. Thank you for saying
Jughead's line, because she's an angel, like flexing on him about Tabitha. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was great. Shouts to FP. We get one shot of our guy in here. Glad to see him there. And I just want to say, Archie and Betty are sitting next to each other a lot in this episode.
Yeah, what's
elbow to elbow. They're just sitting next to each other a lot, like you do. And so that's a fun spatial relationship that 2 people can have and then build their lives around.
Also, the Reggie getting emotional with Archie moment was really nice.
That was beautiful. That whole scene was really beautiful.
It really was. I love you. Yeah, it was really nice.
But MVP, I mean, can we give it to everyone? Can we give it to just the entire cast?
Wow.
Because everyone was really great in this episode. Maybe we'll save that for next time. But I think I got to give it to Cheryl in this episode.
Oh, come on, you dick.
Well, you always get to go ahead of me, so give me a break. I'm going first this time, and I'm saying Cheryl.
Come on, that finishing move was unbelievable.
Really great. Loved her. We got to see, because I think it was a simultaneously paying off a lot of Cheryl stuff from the entire series, but also it felt like it was the first time we'd ever seen her. It was like very fresh Cheryl moment, so I love that. Great stuff.
Pete, what about you? Who's your MVP for the episode?
I'm gonna have to give it up to Betty, I guess, because
you seem so let down by saying that.
Well, I had one all set, and then you took it, so I had to quickly come up with another one. Her going back for more, wanting the darkness as well as the light, really gave me a real Bane moment of she was like, I was born in this, so you were. Yeah, so I also
thought about that. Bane when I was watching her.
Dark Betty vibes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, she's wearing that mask at the end. when she's in
Bane
front of
all
the
day,
mirror.
air day. As I
That's
say.
right, man.
I'm going to give it up to Tabitha. This was her last episode. It was really lovely. I wish we had seen more of her this season. Obviously, we didn't. That is okay. But great send-off here. Really beautiful. Everybody was great across the board.
It's great.
And
great.
I think we can all agree that going into the final episode, I think we're set up for a final episode where every single Riverdale fan is going to be like, I'm very happy with that. That sounds good.
Yep. I think we tend to talk for quite a bit of time on this podcast, but I think our next episode will be just the three of us at the same time saying no notes, and then that'll be the end. That'll be the end of Riverdale After Dark.
Yeah. Well, to that point, we're really going to try here, time depending, to do a bunch more episodes to wrap up the show that we've been covering for so long and been on this journey with all of you for so long. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to put the call out on social media as well. But if you have questions, thoughts, or theories going into the final episode of Riverdale, please hit us up. You can email us at comicbookclublive@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever we are available. We want to do an episode before the finale where we go through all those questions and theories.
All speculation. Questions, answers, full spec. Let's go.
Yeah, let's absolutely do it. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the finale episode, and then we're going to plan on doing at least one episode after that to just deal with our feelings, and then maybe, again, go to you all for your questions and thoughts and stuff. But that all said, if you would like to support this podcast and all the podcasts we do, patreon.com/comicbookclub. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Facebook and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about Riverdale. Apple, Spotify, not Stitcher, because that's going away at the end of the month. You can subscribe on any other major platform at Riverdale Dark on Twitter, Riverdale After on Instagram, Riverdale After Dark on Facebook, comicbookclublive.com for this podcast and many more. Until next time, we'll see you after dark.
Our last episode is called The Reckoning, right? But we're going to be in our 80s. We're going to tape it in our 80s.
Oh, smart.
Yeah.
And just
old Pete. Older
Oh.
Pete. Older Pete.
Yeah, let's not get crazy.
Hey.